Hi, I'm Jeff Frank, the minister of St. Paul's Universalist Church, and I welcome you to this second online service, recorded in our sanctuary here in Little Falls, New York. This is the new reality until society recovers from the COVID-19 pandemic. Our music director, Mark Bunce, and I have committed to creating these services as a means of staying together while we must stay apart. If you are one of the members of our fellow UU churches in the Mohawk Valley cluster, I welcome you. If you are someone who is tuning in simply because you wish to, I welcome you. Please feel free to share this service with anyone who you think might benefit or be interested. 3 quick announcements. Please continue to check your emails. Those of you who are members of the congregation or other congregations that are following and know the email, as I will be using that format to communicate the goings-on for our church and these services in the coming weeks. Our church is on pause as far as meeting, but our bills are not on pause, so please continue to send pledges to our collector, Julie Smith, if you are able. Her address is in the church directory, or you can call, text, or email me, and I will give that address to you. We will be holding a Monday-Thursday online service that will be posted, I'm hoping, Thursday. So please tune in to join us for that. You can find these recordings on YouTube and Facebook, and hopefully soon on the church website. So let's begin. In the Unitarian Universalist tradition, it is our custom to open our services with the lighting of the chalice, which our music director, Mark, will do now as he sings the words. I open with these words of Daniel Kantner. Today we begin the walk to Jerusalem, the Holy Week. The demand that we face the darkness, the broken path, the abuse of power. Today we walk toward the dayspring breaking through, the Easter day of joy. So let us prepare the way. Let us join together in worship to see what holiness resides within us and about us, to welcome in the day and make straight the path for the work of God. Let us worship together. Our opening music is the Palms. My reading today is from the 12th chapter of the Gospel of John, beginning with verse 12. Let me set the stage here. Jesus has been on what we would call a whirlwind tour. He's been preaching, teaching, and performing miracles, the most recent of which involved raising his friend Lazarus from the dead. More and more, his followers have been talking about his being the Messiah, whose coming has been foretold in the Scriptures. He is at the height of his popularity when he and his followers enter the city of Jerusalem to take part in the annual observance of the Passover holiday. Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. The next day, the great crowd that had come to the festival heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. So they took branches of palm trees and went out to meet him, shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel." Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it. As it is written, "Do not be afraid, daughter of Zion. Look, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's colt." His disciples did not understand these things at first, but when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things had been written of him and had been done to him. So the crowd that had been with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to testify. It was also because they heard that he had performed this sign that the crowd went to meet him. The Pharisees, the Jewish religious authorities, then said to one another, "You see, you can do nothing. Look, the world has gone after him." Palm Sunday is the beginning of Holy Week on the Christian calendar. It recalls Jesus' triumphal entry into the city of Jerusalem and is one of only 11 accounts that are found in all 4 of the New Testament Gospels. So it goes without saying that it holds a special significance as far as the story of Jesus and his ministry. Imagine, if you will, seeing those events in person. In modern terms, it would be something like the arrival of a rock star or a famous actor or a popular politician. The crowds are going wild. Jesus arrives on a humble donkey. The people shouting his praises and waving palms. This was a crowd who had heard Jesus' teachings. Some of them, John's gospel tells us, had seen the feats that he had performed. They saw him as a king, a Messiah, whose coming had been foretold to them. Hindsight, as they say, is 20/20, and nearly 2,000 years after these accounts were written, I think the tendency of those of us who honor the Christian tradition is to want to jump from Jesus' grand entrance into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday and go right to the empty tomb and the happy ending of the Easter story, to gloss over what happened in between. But if we pay attention to the whole story, we realize that a lot of those people who waved palms and sang hosannas to Jesus were among the same people who just a short time later were shouting, "Crucify him, crucify him." How did Jesus go so quickly from the height of his fame to an agonizing and wrongful death? And how does any of that relate to us today? The answer, part of it anyway, is that Jesus was an inconvenient Messiah. He wasn't what people were expecting. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, as I always try to keep in mind when I talk about him, Jesus was not a Christian. He was Jewish. And at the time of Jesus' ministry, the Romans had been conquerors of the Jewish people for almost a century and had ruled much of the known world for 600 years. Part of the reason for their success was that when they conquered a people, they allowed them to keep many of their customs and beliefs, just so long as those people accepted at the end of the day that Rome was in charge. While that in some ways may seem generous, the Jewish people were not especially fond of the Roman authorities. They looked to their scriptures, and those writings foretold the coming of a Messiah, an anointed one, who would liberate them from their oppression. Along comes Jesus, a gifted rabbi or teacher, who challenges the Jewish authorities of the time by repeatedly pointing out that they have become so focused on the letter of the law that they have forgotten the spirit of it. This Jesus says that all Jewish law boils down to two basic commandments: love God and love your neighbor as yourself. He has little use for things like eating kosher foods and ritual hand washing. He hangs out with lepers, adulterers, and all other manner of sinners, including the lowest of the low, tax collectors, who were considered traitors by their fellow Jews. He is a charismatic speaker, drawing crowds of thousands and teaching using simple yet powerful stories to make his points. Many people even report that he performs miracles. He heals the sick, gives sight to the blind, feeds a multitude of thousands with only a few baskets of bread and fish. It is even said that he has the power to raise the dead. People hear Jesus' teachings, see what he can do, and they think that the Messiah surely must be in their midst. So on what we call Palm Sunday, this popular Jewish reformer, this man who people are openly claiming is the Messiah, enters into the heart of the Jewish nation during the celebration of one of their biggest religious holidays. The Jewish authorities, the Pharisees, are terrified. When you think back to your Sunday school days, if you went to Sunday school, you probably remember the Pharisees as being the bad guys in the stories of Jesus. They are often portrayed as these stuck-up, holier-than-thou types who at best saw Jesus as a well-meaning but misguided hippie of sorts. But the Pharisees had good reason to worry about Jesus' arrival in Jerusalem at the start of Passover. Remember, the Romans tolerated their conquered subjects, keeping their own practices and beliefs so long as they recognized the final authority of the empire. Well, here it is Passover, and in comes Jesus with his disciples and his followers, many of whom are openly proclaiming him to be the Messiah, openly proclaiming him to be their king. The Pharisees put two and two together, and they fear that Jesus' followers are going to get it in their heads to rise up, and that when the Romans see this, they are going to go after the Jewish people, all of them. Not just the ones who think that Jesus is the Messiah, all of the Jewish people. The Pharisees start to think that Jesus has got to go. Not because they are evil, but out of a sense of self-preservation for themselves and for their people. So Jesus was an inconvenient Messiah to the Pharisees. He shared their religion and had a keen understanding of it, but he also questioned their authority, and he seemed to have no idea of the potential doom he was about to unleash on his own people, to their way of thinking. What kind of Messiah is that? And Jesus doesn't do himself any favors in the days that follow. He goes into the temple, sees people selling animals for sacrifices, and other people exchanging one type of currency for another, and Jesus goes nuts. He takes a handful of braided cords, beats the vendors and money changers, flips their tables, and chases them out. To put it in perspective, this would be like Jesus showing up at the mall on Black Friday and chasing out all the merchants trying to cash in on Christmas. You can almost imagine him yelling at them, "No, this is not what Christmas is supposed to be about." So not only is Jesus seen as a risk to Jewish security, he's bad for business. Again, an inconvenient Messiah. The next day, he has a run-in with the Pharisees. He repeatedly points out their hypocrisy, telling them that they are like whitewashed tombs, beautiful on the outside, but dead on the inside. Things get so out of hand that one of Jesus' own disciples, Judas, feels that enough is enough and works with the temple authorities to get Jesus off the streets. He thinks that he is helping his people, not realizing that when the Pharisees want Jesus out of the way, they aren't talking about jailing him. They're talking about killing him. Jesus was an inconvenient Messiah for those crowds who just a few days earlier had been singing his praises and proclaiming him the King of Israel. They wanted a Messiah who would take up a sword and lead an army to free them from Roman oppression. Or perhaps they expected a man who had worked miracles to use his powers to restore Judea to freedom. But Jesus was following a higher calling, a different agenda. So what did the people do? They turned on him in a heartbeat. As it is today, so it was back then. How often have we seen a famous or powerful figure admired as they rise, only to take some degree of satisfaction in their fall? Jesus was an inconvenient Messiah to his disciples. These men, mostly fishermen, tradesmen, a tax collector, a zealot, ignored Jesus when he repeatedly predicted his own demise. No, they thought, not Jesus. How could these things possibly happen to their friend, their wise teacher, their Messiah? Jesus ends up arrested on trumped-up charges after he and his disciples share the traditional Passover meal, and he is taken away. And these friends, these loyal followers who dropped everything to travel and learn with Jesus for 3 years, scattered in terror, fleeing for their lives. Peter, one of Jesus' inner circle, not only abandons him, but denies even knowing him, not once, not twice, but 3 times in one night. I don't want to go any further with that story because that's next week's sermon. But my point is this: Jesus was an inconvenient Messiah. He didn't follow the script, as it were. He was the founder of what would become the most practiced religion in the world. But he didn't accomplish that by being the person that everyone expected him to be. What relevance does this have for us today? Well, it's 2020, and you know what? Jesus is still an inconvenient Messiah. Granted, some of us don't necessarily think of him as a Messiah at all, but Jesus is central to both Unitarianism and Universalism. Even if we view him only as a great spiritual teacher, Jesus still troubles us. He inconveniences our thinking. Just look at his teachings. Love thy neighbor. All of my neighbors? That's a tall order. Treat everyone the way I want to be treated? Everyone? Really? That's not always easy. Turn the other cheek? What if the other person really has it coming? Help the poor, feed the hungry, clothe the naked? Aren't some of those people just lazy welfare bums? Why should I have to help them? Oops, that sounds like I'm judging others. Jesus also taught us not to do that. And it's also a tall order, an inconvenience. Following those teachings is very inconvenient. And yet, this is what Jesus called on people to do. It is inconvenient. It is challenging. But if we all did it, each of us, what would the world be like? Let's face it, Jesus, whoever he was, is a tough act to follow. It's hard to identify with someone like him, but we sure can identify with the crowds or the disciples. As I said earlier, hindsight is 20/20. Perhaps we like to think that if we had been there, we would have been steadfast. We would have welcomed Jesus into Jerusalem, but we would not have called for his death a few days later when he failed to live up to our expectations. When he was arrested, we like to think that we would have stood by him, even if it meant being arrested ourselves and executed or thrown in jail. We are human, though, and chances are that we would have done the exact same thing that the people in those stories did. We are human. We screw up. Not all of the time, of course, but enough of the time. I think about that, and I think about Jesus' ministry. At no point does he ever say, you have to be able to do these things that I'm teaching perfectly. Jesus was human too. Perhaps he was also divine or divinely inspired, or neither. That is for you to decide. We are a free church after all. But Jesus, like all great religious teachers, sets the example, and it is for us to decide how to follow it. Is it convenient? No, it is not. But the question remains, if we all incorporated those teachings into our lives, not perfectly, we're not asked to do it perfectly. We'll always have moments where we stumble. But if we all gave it a genuine effort, even half of the time, to follow those teachings, what kind of world would this be? Until next week, amen. Here's Mark with our closing song, There is a Balm in Gilead. Thank you for joining us for our second online service. We'll be having a Maundy Thursday service posted on Thursday, and of course, our Easter Sunday service with more music, more words, definitely more music, not sure about more words, for next Sunday. And as is our tradition, let us now extinguish the chalice.
The flame is extinguished, but not our hope for the future, our courage in the face of crisis, or the love we share in all the world.
Now Mark will sing our benediction, Be Ours a Religion.
Sunshine goes everywhere, its temple all space, its shrine the good heart, its creed all truth, its